Okay. Kyle, thanks again for spending some time with me today. I'd love to build on our last conversation and chat a little bit more about during these different times how motivation levels with athletes might be changing, and maybe we could talk a little bit about how we can take a perspective as seeing some of this stuff as opportunities, and then also maybe some of your experience with some of your athletes that have not necessarily seen it as an opportunity as much, but hindered their ability to continue to progress their skill. So let's just maybe start there, and then we'll go back and forth a little bit with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the motivation piece is going to be an interesting one. I saw a post about 2 days ago. It was Olympic athletes who are finding innovative ways to train in these kind of quarantine-like environments. And there were some pretty creative strategies that were being used. But it got me thinking a lot about, where certain athletes are going to be with respect to their desire to want to continue to find ways to train, and where others are going to be maybe more motivated to slow down and hit the pause button on sport, and to actually invest a little bit more time and energy into their self-care. So I think motivation, it's all going to depend likely how athletes, what I've heard so far is athletes are responding to this from a motivational perspective, really based on how they entered into this kind of quarantine-like situation. So for those athletes where motivation was really thriving, I think that has had some momentum, and really I'm hearing that those athletes are continuing to feel motivated to train, and they're continued to feel sort of that ignition to do whatever they can do to stay connected to the sport as possible. Whereas others maybe who entered this new kind of reality with the motivation that was already kind of dwindling, those are the ones that are probably showing symptoms of a sort of just concern from my end with respect to motivation. So I think motivation is something that a lot of people, they largely misunderstand, and they really don't know necessarily how to support it. Often as athletes, but even as people who are supporting athletes, like parents of athletes or coaches for athletes.
Mm-hmm. From my experience, Kyle, over the last couple of weeks, what I've started to see is the opportunity to understand that motivation doesn't necessarily have to be tied to something external. So in the context of golf, let's say, now there are, there's no tournaments. There's nothing to strive or work for, is what I'm hearing. And what I've found, and most of our discussions have been around, trying to find the inherent joy of actually training. So I've looked at it as sort of the two buckets. There's I'm going to do this activity or skill to get something out of it. So working towards, the Olympics or some sort of championship. But then there's this other bucket around like, well, how does it feel when you're actually training? So, when I go out for a run, yes, I'm trying to evolve my skill set within running, but there's also this unique opportunity to doesn't that feel good to just run? And that's where I tried to go a little bit here, is to say, yes, no, you don't have a golf ball, you don't have a basketball net, or whatever your sports skill is that you usually train it within. There's lots of unique ways to still train them, but more so, the reason you're going to do it is because of how much you truly love just doing that, So I wondered if you can maybe connect with that a little bit, but that's been where I've been going with. You can maybe speak to the science of motivation in terms of internal or external, that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that you're going there with your athletes. Like, you're doing so many great things in this area, and I think your intuition or your understanding of this is pretty much on the mark. Yeah, so I think I would start by saying that motivation, the skill of motivation, is actually more of a skill of attention than anything. So if you want to be really good at feeling motivated to engage in a certain behavior or a certain task, I think it's important that you understand that it is mostly attentional as opposed to anything else. So it's where you choose to place your attention that's going to make you feel that drive or not to do something. I think a lot of people, they talk about motivation in terms of amount of motivation. You hear this a lot, whether it's, in the media or whether you hear just in conversations with athletes. I feel like this athlete is missing motivation or lacking motivation, or we need to help this person find more motivation. Again, this quantity-like aspect of motivation. So an analogy that I hear a lot is like this fuel tank where we're trying to fill up the fuel tank. So I don't mind the analogy of a fuel tank, but I think we have to rethink what motivation is. And it's not about this quantity of motivation. We all in theory have the same quantity of motivation. It's the quality of motivation. So if we think about a fuel tank, we're all going to have a full fuel tank. Just some people are going to be consistently filling up their fuel tank with premium fuel, and other people are going to be putting the cheap stuff in, or maybe putting anything in there that might be actually doing a disservice to the whole engine of the car. So motivation quality is what I'm really interested in. There's different types of motivational quality. The highest quality comes from what you were exactly referring to, more of this sort of internal intrinsic drive that we have. Now that being said, you can still drive pretty far on external motivation, right? Like I'm sure like me, you probably don't put the best quality gas in your car every time you stop at the gas station. Sometimes, maybe often, you put the unleaded stuff in because it's a little bit cheaper, and that's all good. You just have to understand the shortcomings of that unleaded fuel, right? Like our engines aren't going to last as long in our car as opposed to if we put the higher quality fuel. The same thing is true with athletes. So for me, motivation is really key. So it's one of the things that I am constantly trying to assess and keep my finger on the pulse of, just so I understand where an athlete is headed. You can really get insight. You can really, I would say with a fair degree of accuracy, project where this athlete is going to be in the future based on the quality of motivation he or she is really tapping into in the short term. So just to maybe jump into it a little bit, the different types, at the highest end is what you just spoke of, this inherent joy or pleasure. There's nothing that's going to have more power, impact to help us move into action than really connecting to what we enjoy and what is pleasurable about a certain experience or an activity. But again, that's an attentional skill. You need to choose to place your attention on the things that are inherently enjoyable or pleasurable about a certain activity, because the truth is there's so many things about an activity, right? We take that jogging, for example. Mm-hmm. I've been jogging with somebody who says, wow, this is really tough. Well, yeah, it is tough. That's true. It is tough. Wow, my legs are really burning. That's also true. Wow, I'm a little bit out of breath and maybe I'm cramping. That's also true. But is there anything that is pleasurable or enjoyable about the run? Well, yeah, we're having a really good conversation right now together. Yeah, I'm out in nature and I feel actually like I'm a little bit energized right now. Fantastic. You could probably name another 2 or 3 things. So focusing and training your attention to stay on those things more regularly, that's where you're going to tap into that highest level of drive. Most of us, because of, again, this sort of negativity bias that's built into us, most of us, we don't even really choose where our focus goes. It just kind of goes to the places of pain and suffering and annoyance that we're trying to rid ourselves of or avoid at all cost. And that really challenges our ability to do anything tough, right? You can't avoid being uncomfortable, especially in the pursuit of high performance. You can't avoid some form of suffering. It's a part of the human experience. It's how you choose to view that suffering or how you choose to view that uncomfortable situation that's going to determine the motivation quality you have.
Yes. And I wonder with more of the day-to-day scheduling of the skill, when we're looking at maybe different ways where we can tweak the environment to help with motivation. Kyle, I wonder if you can speak to that. So like from my standpoint, doing movements within your skill at a time of the day and also in an environment as best as you can to again help draw out some of those more positive aspects of it is one thing that we've been talking about. So it'd be like, okay, we're doing some of our golf specific movement patterns at a time of the day when you're fresh, and then you can even do them like outside in your backyard, where you maybe can pull on the nature as opposed to, doing them in a dark basement. Can you speak to that maybe a little bit, just to kind of tie off your call, like the actual logistics of how you would recommend an athlete design their skill development session around helping with motivation?
Yeah. So the environment is huge. The environment is maybe the biggest factor in shaping any habit. We like to think that willpower is really important, but willpower only goes so far. If you create an environment that is conducive to what you're trying to achieve, that person is always going to outperform and out succeed the person whose environment is actually working against those habits. So I think there's a couple elements of environment that are really key. There's the physical environment. So actually where you choose to do what you do, or how you choose to bring in certain cues or triggers in your physical space that are going to remind you of sort of the behaviors you're looking to do or to achieve on a regular basis. I think setting up that environment makes a lot of sense. So whether it's putting exercise equipment kind of in a space and having this nice little area ready to go, so that when you walk downstairs, everything is ready. You don't need to get anything out of the closet. You don't need to prepare anything. It's ready, and all you have to do is basically just start to engage. I think another area, though, another part of the environment that's really important is the social environment. So having a tribe around you, or creating a tribe around you to help you find more joy. It's a lot more enjoyable to do things in groups, and we also are tapping into a really basic sort of evolutionary instinct to connect to the people that matter to us or that are closest to us. This is really important. So if we can find a way to get a few people engaged in what we're doing, and I'm hearing about these different strategies that some students are using, where they're studying online, or kids are playing online with other kids now, where you literally can go on YouTube and you can find these sort of live sessions where people are connecting through Zoom, and they're saying hi for 2 minutes, and then they're working for an hour, and then after the hour they take a break together. And a lot of people talk about the accountability. Well, it's more than accountability. We're actually trying to behave in a way that matches the tribe's intentions, which is really powerful. And the last piece that you touched on was the timing. And that's also, for me, sort of an environmental piece a little bit. You want to make sure that you are understanding that there's going to be certain activities that it's just harder to find pleasure in at certain times of the day. Like for me, it's just harder for me to really tap into the joy of exercising after dinner, for example, or after I put the kids to bed, when I'm just naturally going to be more exhausted. My state is going to challenge my attention to stay connected to the inherent joys of that activity in the evenings. Whereas first thing in the morning, I have more attentional capacity. It's so much easier for me to see the exercise as an energizing part of my day. So I'm better able to connect to those joys, those sort of naturally pleasurable feelings that come from exercising.
Mm-hmm. And I think, just to tie off here, Kyle, and this is another conversation, but what I'm hearing a lot is the sensory experience of the skill, and this is where you get into the mindfulness bucket of sport performance. I'm hearing more and more is really the key. That, and we would always speak of, when you are mindful and in the present moment through your senses, is really when we're operating at our best. So I think that might be our next conversation, is around, well, how can we bring a mindfulness-based approach into these activities? I.e., when you're running, could you tap into what your feet feel like, or can you listen to the birds? And now you're like really connecting a lot of things that are going to really help to not increase the motivation, but create that inherent joy for the activity, which, as you're describing, is the connector to doing this skill over a long period of time without external motivation. And to your point, when conditions are good and I have a triathlon that I'm working towards, of course, that's like, I see it almost kind of like that's the first piece for a lot of people to say, well, no, for me to go and do my run, I need to have something to strive for. And what I'm hearing from you is that is not a bad thing. That is a piece of motivation, but what I'm hearing more is it might not last in the long term if that's your only strategy with
So you're right on the mark. The sustainability of external drive is a lot less, and we also know that over the long run, the more that you choose to predominantly tap into external motivation, the more that's going to increase stress. It's going to decrease well-being. It's going to decrease performance. It's because what's happening is you're creating an environment where you can't necessarily be vulnerable and you can't necessarily be open. It's not a safe environment. So failure is not going to be as much of an option. You're not going to be as willing to explore and to discover. But just quickly, you hit it right on the head, and it will be the topic for the next conversation. We talked last time about prerequisite skills. Everything we're talking about today with respect to motivation, given that it isn't an attentional skill, the prerequisite is being able to tap into certain mindfulness specific skills that allow you to actually unearth and connect to these pleasurable sensations of the experience.
it. Love it. That's great, Kyle. I'm excited for our next chat. I think we can do it more around the practical application of mindfulness within the sport context. I think that would be cool, and that might be 5 or 6 calls, but at least we'll start it off with that. So thanks so much for your expertise around motivation, and now as I'm hearing, attention with motivation is really the key skill. So thank you for your time, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, my pleasure. Enjoy your day.
Thanks, Kyle.
Yeah.